Have you ever had a day where you knew exactly what you needed to do, but somehow you just didn't do it? You knew you should make the call, you knew you should get up a little earlier, you knew you should finish what you started, and yet there you were, making another excuse. Now, the problem usually isn't that you don't know what to do. You know. The problem is that you've allowed your mind to become very good at talking you out of it. And your mind is clever. Give it 5 minutes and it'll give you a pretty good reason to wait until tomorrow. Give it a little more comfort and it'll tell you that you're tired. Let it have its way long enough and eventually you start calling your habits your personality. I've always been this way. I'm just not disciplined. That's just how I am. Well, maybe that's not how you are. Maybe that's simply how you've trained yourself to think. And there's a big difference. Because if you can train your mind to avoid the work, you can also train it to do the work. If you can teach yourself to make excuses, you can teach yourself to keep promises. So the question isn't whether you have a strong mind or a weak mind. The question is, who's running your life, you or the voice in your head? Because sooner or later, somebody has to be in charge, and I think it ought to be you. Life is pressing on you from more than one direction at once. You've got work obligations that don't stop. You've got people depending on you, a family you're trying to provide for. And somewhere underneath all of that, there's a version of yourself you thought you'd be by now, a version that's maybe a little sharper, a little further along, a little more in command of the day. And the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be, that gap doesn't usually announce itself loudly. It just sits there at the back of most evenings, when the house is quiet and you're honest for a minute. You're not broken. You're not behind some unreachable standard. You're just dealing with something that nobody pulled you aside and explained clearly enough. And it's this: your mind, left untrained, will always choose the easier road. Always. Not because you are weak, but because that is what an untrained mind does. It seeks comfort. It avoids discomfort, and it is extraordinarily good at making both of those things sound like reasonable decisions. The mind defaults to comfort. Here is the first thing worth understanding about your own mind. It was not designed primarily for achievement. It was not designed to push you toward the difficult, the demanding, or the long-term rewarding. It was designed, at its most fundamental level, to protect you from immediate discomfort. Think about the man at the workbench. He picks up a hammer, and if he holds it wrong and it causes pain, his hand adjusts, automatically, immediately, without a meeting or a deliberation. His nervous system simply moves away from what hurts. That is the default setting. Move toward ease, move away from pain, and for a great many things in a man's life, that default serves him well. Touch the hot stove once and you won't touch it again. That's useful. That's the mind doing exactly what it should. But somewhere, the same mechanism gets pointed in the wrong direction. The difficult conversation you need to have with your business partner. That feels like pain. So the mind steers you away from it. The early morning discipline you committed to last Sunday, that costs comfort. So the mind offers you 17 good reasons to start next week instead. The book you said you'd read, the plan you said you'd write, the call you said you'd make. The mind is not your enemy in these moments. It is just doing what it was built to do. It is protecting you from discomfort. The problem is that in this case, the discomfort it is steering you away from is the very discomfort that leads to the life you want. William James, who spent his entire career studying the nature of habit and the human mind, put it simply, he said that the great thing in all education is to make the nervous system your ally, not your enemy. Your ally, not your master, not your enemy, your ally. That one word changes the whole frame, because you are not fighting your mind. You are redirecting it. You are training it, the same way you would train any instrument you intend to rely on, to respond the way you choose, rather than the way it defaults. And here is the principle underneath all of that. Comfort is not the reward for a well-lived day. It is the currency your mind tries to spend before the day is done. The man who lets his mind spend that currency freely, all day, every day, finds at the end of the year that he is exactly where he was at the beginning. The man who decides when the comfort gets spent, who earns it by meeting his own standard first, finds something very different waiting for him at the end of that same year. Your mind defaults to comfort. You don't have to. That is the first thing, and it is worth sitting with. The thought you repeat becomes the life you live. Let me tell you something that took me a long time to fully appreciate. The thoughts you allow to run through your mind on a regular basis are not just passing commentary, they are instructions, and your life is quietly following them. When you get up in the morning and your first thought is, "This is going to be a long day," that is an instruction. When you look at a difficult task and your first thought is, "I'm probably not ready for this," that is an instruction. When you tell yourself dozens of times, across dozens of mornings, that you are not a disciplined person, that is not an observation. That is a curriculum, and your behavior will graduate from it precisely on schedule. Marcus Aurelius wrote this in his private journal. He wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing to remind himself, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Read that slowly. Because he is not talking about what you think about once. He is talking about the repeated thought, the habitual thought. The thought you have returned to so many times that it has become less like a thought and more like a standing assumption about who you are and what your life is. Now here is where this becomes very practical. You have a set of thoughts about yourself that you have been repeating for years. Some of them are true and useful. They serve you well. Keep them. But some of them, the ones that tell you you're not quite ready, that other men have advantages you don't have, that your best years have already passed, or that the window is narrowing, those thoughts are not your friends. And here's the thing about those thoughts. You did not choose them initially. They arrived from somewhere, from a hard season, from something someone said when you were younger, from a failure that was filed away as evidence of something permanent. You didn't choose the first arrival, but you have been choosing every repetition since. Think about the man who tells himself, every time he faces something hard, "I've never been good under pressure." He says it casually. He may even say it with a self-deprecating laugh at the dinner table. But he has said it enough times that it has become the lens through which every moment of difficulty gets interpreted. And the lens, used long enough, stops feeling like a lens. It starts feeling like the truth. What you repeat, you reinforce. What you reinforce, you become. So the question is not whether you are a disciplined man or an undisciplined one. The question is what you have been telling yourself about that, and for how long. Because here is the principle, and I want you to hear it clearly. You cannot hold a low thought about yourself consistently and build a high life at the same time. The two are in fundamental conflict. And one of them will win. Not by force, not by some dramatic moment of reckoning, but simply by repetition. Whichever thought you feed more, wins. So feed the right ones, deliberately, starting today. Not with false flattery, not by pretending the challenges are smaller than they are, but by choosing, each time the habitual thought returns, to replace it with something more accurate. Something that acknowledges the difficulty and still moves toward it. Something that says, "This is hard, and I am the kind of man who does hard things." Say that often enough, and your nervous system will stop arguing with it. Say it often enough, and it will stop being something you say to yourself. It will be something you simply are. Discipline is not about force. Now, I suspect some of you have tried the force approach. You set the alarm for 5 in the morning. You wrote the list. You made the commitment, loudly and sincerely, and for about 11 days, things went well. And then something happened. One morning when the resistance was a little stronger, or the day before had been a little harder, and the whole structure came down. And maybe you told yourself that discipline just wasn't in your nature. I want to offer you a different explanation. It came down not because you are undisciplined by nature. It came down because you were relying on force. And force, applied against a mind that hasn't been genuinely persuaded, is a contest you will keep losing. Because the mind can outlast the will every time. Willpower is a resource. It runs low. It is affected by fatigue, by hunger, by a hard afternoon at the office, by the conversation you had with your brother-in-law at Sunday dinner. It is real, but it is not reliable as a foundation. Epictetus, a man who spent years enslaved and still built the most disciplined interior life of his age, said that no man is free who is not master of himself. Master of himself. Not a man who forces himself. A man who has achieved mastery, and mastery is a different thing than effort. Mastery means the thing you once had to fight to do has become simply what you do. It is no longer a battle, it has become a behavior, and it became a behavior not through gritted teeth and sheer force of will, but through a change in identity. Here is how that change happens. You decide, at a level below the level of daily motivation, who you are, not who you are trying to be, not who you aspire to become, who you are right now as a decision. The man who identifies himself as someone who honors his word to himself does not need to fight the alarm clock on the hard mornings. He gets up because getting up is consistent with who he is. There is no battle because the decision was made before the alarm sounded. The identity made the choice for him, the same way an honest man doesn't spend mental energy deciding whether to return the extra change the cashier gave him by mistake. He returns it because that is who he is. The decision is downstream of the identity. Now, what does this look like in practice? Because I know that sounds like philosophy, and I promised you practical. It starts with a very small thing. Pick one commitment, one specific, concrete, daily commitment that matters to you, and hold it. Not for a week, not until the motivation runs out. Hold it until it becomes unremarkable, until the version of you who does not hold it starts to feel like a stranger. That is the first investment, and it pays an unusual return, because when you have held one commitment long enough that it has become identity, when you can point to it and say, without drama, I am a man who does this, the next commitment is easier to build. And the one after that is easier still, not because you have more willpower, because you have a different self-image to build from. Benjamin Franklin understood this. He did not try to acquire 12 virtues at once. He chose one. He worked on it until it required less of him. Then he moved to the next, not because he was timid in his ambitions, because he understood the compounding nature of character. You build it the same way you build anything of substance, one piece at a time, laid carefully on top of the last. Discipline is not about forcing yourself. It is about becoming the kind of man who does not need to be forced. That is the principle, and it changes everything about how you approach the work. Hold the line when your mind pushes back. Here's something nobody tells you about genuine growth. Your mind does not applaud the decision to change. It resists it, and the resistance tends to arrive at the most inconvenient possible moments. On the morning after the decision, at the point of highest discomfort, at the precise moment when holding the line feels most expensive. You will be 3 weeks into a new discipline, and your mind will remind you of every time you started and stopped. It will pull the files. It will present them as evidence. And in a tired moment, in a hard week, that evidence can feel very convincing. So let's talk about what to do in those moments, because those moments are not optional. They will come, and your response to them is not a small thing. Your response to those moments is the whole thing. The first thing to understand is that the pushback itself is a sign that something real is happening. If you have decided to change something genuinely significant, the way you start your morning, the way you manage your time, the way you treat the promises you make to yourself, your mind will fight that change, not because the change is wrong, because the change is different from what has been established. And the mind, as we have said, defaults to the known, to the familiar, to the comfortable. Theodore Roosevelt put it in terms that have stayed with me. He said that the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasms and the great devotions. The man in the arena, making the attempt, getting it wrong and getting back to it, not the man who sits at a comfortable distance and tells you about all the ways the attempt is likely to fail. There is a version of that comfortable critic that lives inside your own mind. It is the voice that watches you try and immediately begins preparing the case for why you will not succeed. You know that voice. You have heard it your whole adult life. Do not argue with it. This is important. When you argue with the resistant voice in your own head, you give it more attention than it deserves. You make it the subject of the conversation. You spend energy on the debate instead of on the work. Instead, acknowledge it the way you would acknowledge someone in your neighborhood who always tells you the weather will be bad. Yes, thank you, I heard you. And then go do the work anyway. The voice does not need to be convinced. The voice does not need to be silenced. It needs to be made irrelevant by the fact of the action. Because here is what happens when you hold the line in the hard moments. Each time you act in spite of the resistance loses a little of its authority. Not all at once, gradually. The same way a creek cuts a new path through rock, not by force, not by one dramatic surge of water, but by the steady, patient repetition of water moving across stone. The mind that once talked you out of things with ease begins to find it harder to do, because the evidence has shifted. The record of your choices has changed. And the voice that once said, "You always give up at this point," has fewer exhibits to point to. Hold the line, not for the applause of it, not for someone else's satisfaction, but because you said you would. And the man who keeps his word to himself, on the days when no one is watching and nothing makes it easy, that man is building something that cannot be taken from him. He is building a self he trusts. And a man who trusts himself does not need to constantly renegotiate with his own mind about whether to do the work. He just does it. The man who governs himself. What does that man look like? He does not look dramatically different on the outside, not right away, but spend a week in his company and you'll notice something that's hard to put into words at first. There is a quality of steadiness about him, a sense that he is living on his own terms, not with arrogance. There is nothing loud about it, but with a kind of settled authority that comes from a man who has been through the interior battle and has, at least partially, won it. His mornings are his. He does not spend the first hour of the day negotiating with himself about whether to get up and do what he committed to. That negotiation ended a long time ago. He made his decision when it was still easy, and he held it until it was no longer a decision at all. It is simply what he does. His work is different, not because the work is easier, but because he approaches it without the overhead of the mental contest. He does not spend 30 minutes at his desk finding reasons to delay before he begins. He begins, because beginning is what he does, because the man he has decided to be begins. And here's the one I want you to stay with for a moment. His relationship with his own word has changed. He says something to himself. I will do this tomorrow. And tomorrow, he does it. And that may sound like a small thing, but that one shift, accumulated across months and years, changes the entire interior landscape of a man's life. Because a man who keeps his word to himself is a man who trusts himself. And a man who trusts himself carries a different kind of confidence than the man who does not. Not the confidence of someone who never doubts. The confidence of someone who has proven in the privacy of his own choices that he can be relied upon. That when the hard moment comes, he will not fold. He has the record. I want to say something about what that means for the years ahead of you. If you are in your 40s, if there are still a good 20 or 25 years of productive life in front of you, then the work you do on your own mind in this season is not small. It is perhaps the most significant investment you can make in those years. Because 20 years of living with a trained mind is a very different thing from 20 years of living with an untrained one. The trained mind compounds. Every year, you are a little more effective, a little more clear, a little less at war with yourself. The untrained mind also compounds. Every year, the habits are a little more entrenched, the excuses a little more elaborate, the gap between who you are and who you intended to be a little wider. You choose which compounding you live with, not once, every morning, with what you do in the first hour, with what you say to yourself when the resistance arrives, with whether you hold the line or negotiate it away. Every day is a vote. Cast enough votes in the right direction, and the man you are becoming begins to look a great deal like the man you always knew you could be. So, let me bring this back to where we started. Have you ever had a day where you knew exactly what you needed to do, and you didn't do it? Yes? So have I. So has every man who has ever been honest about it. The question was never whether that day would come. The question is what you decide about it. Is it evidence of who you are, or is it evidence of who you have allowed yourself to become by default, and who you now have the full capacity to change? Because if you can train your mind to avoid the work, you can train it to do the work. That was true at the beginning of this conversation. It is still true now. The voice in your head is not your identity. It is a habit. And habits can be changed by any man who is serious enough, consistent enough, and honest enough to change them. Be that man, not tomorrow, not when the circumstances are more cooperative, not after the next hard season passes. Today, in the next decision you make, in the first moment this morning or this evening when the voice tells you to wait and you decide to act instead, that is the beginning. And one beginning, held long enough, becomes a life. That is enough for today. The work begins now.